Hi, my name is Jerry Thomas, and and I'm a board member of Watsonville Wetlands Watch. And want to thank you for all coming out to the work and for one of our educational meetings. And I'm particularly happy to be able to introduce John Laird, somebody that I had it clarified this evening that we served on the People's Democratic Club in 76.
1976.
And John has probably everyone in this room knows, has had a phenomenal career in Santa Cruz County, served on the city council for 2 terms until he was termed out, was on the assembly for 3 terms, 6 years until he was termed out. Did a phenomenal job in both capacities. Worked, also was elected to the Cabrillo College Board and served, I'm not sure how many years. But what we're really interested in is what he's been doing for the last 7 and almost 8 years at the state level. And it was an interesting issue. He's the Secretary of Natural Resources, or California Secretary for Natural Resources, and there were 2 or 3 other names, and I'm not sure what the title is, but to cut to the chase, he's actually the sort of the head person below the governor for all of the different boards and commissions, and he serves on 16, I think it's 16 different boards or commissions or bureaus or whatever, and is directly responsible for 30 others. Well, there's some crossover. So he's unbelievably knowledgeable about what's going on in terms of the state activity with the natural resources, the broader environment, water issues, and the whole, basically everything. And one thing that I guarantee you tonight, you are going to learn something from John that you didn't know before, and it's going to be more than one something, it's going to be multiple something. So with that, I'd like to bring John in, and he can start.
Thank you. And I know I have an hour, and I want to make sure that the second half is totally for questions. But maybe to start with one thing that Jerry had in his introduction, that will be one thing you never knew. And that is I prided myself when I was in the legislature on being a serious legislator. 82 bills signed into law in 6 years, and budget chair, and I just didn't want to play the traditional form of politics and be very serious. But I cast a frivolous vote on one bill, and this one bill was to change the name of the Resources Agency to the Natural Resources. And I said, I'll be damned if we're going to put the NRA in charge of it. So now I'm the secretary of the NRA. And who knew it was gonna, my legacy bill, or one of them was to do a bill to create the Sierra Nevada Conservancy. And I had to take this amendment that I was very unhappy about to add the Secretary of Resources to the board. And who knew that then I'd be the secretary. And I was taking an amendment that would put me on the board for 8 years of the agency I'd helped create. Well, as Jerry said, just for the uninitiated, the Natural Resources Agency, we have 19,000 people, a $10 billion budget. The biggest departments are water and fire and parks, fish and wildlife, energy. We have the Conservation Corps. Much to my distress, I have oil and gas. And then the conservancies, it is a huge constellation of organizations, and it's about managing the natural resources in California. And I thought I would go through some of the top line issues and things that are going on and that we're working on that you're reading about, and then go to questions. And I thought I'd just probably start with the one that's at the top of the headlines right now and talk just briefly about fire. Because I have CAL FIRE in the agency, and I've been very involved in what's been going on. We have, at the moment, 17 significant fires in California. They have turned the corner on the southern of the two fires in Clear Lake, and people were allowed back in yesterday and today. They're starting to get a significant handle, even though it's mostly the Forest Service, on the Yosemite fire, the Ferguson fire. The one in Southern California that broke out in Cleveland National Forest, this looks like it's going to burn all the way through to Lake Elsinore, and so they're getting people ready for how that burns out. One broke out this afternoon and initially has had a significant rate of spread sort of east of Bernie and also in Shasta County, where they've also been so hard hit with the car fire. And the car fire, they've really got their arms around it on the urban side by Redding, but it is really heading into the Trinity National Forest in the one place that they don't have their arms around it. They're finally thinking the smoke will lessen a little in the next few days. And I was so disturbed when I came over the hill this afternoon and saw that the smoke was here. I was just living for it, because if you look out my office window across Sacramento, it's as if, as I was saying earlier, as if you were in Los Angeles in the 1960s. And I was up with Senator Feinstein and Senator Heller and others at the Tahoe Summit Monday and Tuesday, and you couldn't see across the lake. So it's just been significant everywhere. And I think the issue is you know, I posted something about the fires because I was standing behind the governor when he did his press conference last week, and I posted a picture. And somebody posted a comment that they said, "Oh, come on, the fire in Redding was started by a cigarette. What's different?" And it was, and it's actually 95% of fires in California are human caused. And yet, the conditions around the fires, the long drought, the dryness, we still have 127 million dead trees in California coming out of the drought. Those conditions are what's different. 25 years ago, we had a certain defined fire season, and our fire season now starts 30 days earlier than 25 years ago and goes 30 days longer. Twice in the time I've been secretary, we have not staffed down firefighters at all for the winter. The fire season has kept going. One year, there were two really significant fires that were big in Humboldt County in January, arguably the wettest place in California. So it's evidence that the climate is in fact changing. And so the fact that it's human-caused fires, and the fact that some of our forest science has changed in what should be done. There's still a lot of conflict, but allowing certain things to remain on the bed and be fuel for fire, we are working really hard to treat those where there's an urban interface, where they're near power lines, where they're near roadways, as the one place that we could arguably do fire prevention in the terms of natural resources. And the governor has funded doubling the amount that's treated. We're going to do more prescribed fire in certain places. And I think when I first went into the legislature, forestry were incredibly divisive issues. There was no middle ground. And I think now, with the dead trees, the drought, the changing weather patterns, the changing fire patterns, people are starting to figure out ways to come together because there's common interest in the health of the forests on both sides. So that seems to be what's at the top right now. And just mentioning one thing that ties in is that being up in Tahoe, I never thought I would be spending so much time on Lake Tahoe. And in the first 2 years, Nevada was threatening to pull out of the Tahoe Compact for Lake Clarity and the health of the lake. And I reached out to my counterpart in Nevada, and we did negotiations over 6 months, did the first update to a Tahoe general plan in 25 years. They backed off some of their more draconian requests of California. And then we've been marching ahead together. And we established a joint two-state science panel to really try to integrate science more into what the health of Lake Tahoe is. Because right now, and this is sort of evidence of what I was talking about with climate, Lake Tahoe is heating faster than any freshwater alpine lake in the world. And the temperature is high, and it's changing the health of the lake, because the lake relies on, as a layperson to try to explain it, the lake relies on cold water coming in from the melted snow and churning at different levels and dealing with circulation and the health of the lake. And between the 4 years of drought and sort of the one semi-dry year that's happened since then, that has just stopped. And we have decided our entire decision of the health of Lake Tahoe on its clarity, and that has been what's measured. And if none of you have ever seen a seki dish dip, I presided over one at Loch Lomond in Santa Cruz 2 weekends ago. I did not know they did it here. And it is not modern digital science. It is, you have a white disc with a weight on it, and it goes down, and the last person on the boat that sees it determines what the measurement of the clarity of the lake is. That's how it's done. I took my spouse with me to the official one in Tahoe the first year I was doing this, and he's very outspoken usually on everything, and this time he waited until we got in the car and the car door closed, and he says, "That's it? That's how they do it?" And so that has been our traditional measurement. Now we have to figure out ways to measure the health of Lake Tahoe. Of course, there's issues of invasives, there's the issue of the temperature and the clarity. The sedimentation is what leads to the clarity. Most of our efforts have been to deal with how sediment does not flow in the lake. That is a governing thing on anything that is built in Lake Tahoe. And then the Angora fire is now 11 or 12 years ago. But fire and forest health in the basin are big issues. And we just see the changing climate by the fact that the lake is warming so much. And I'm struggling, and I'm dragging Nevada along to deal with the scientists to tell us don't just give us the diagnosis of what's wrong, give us some ideas of interventions that we can make to try to deal with it. And this was a 3-hour meeting we jointly chaired on Monday afternoon, and I had one of those moments that the scientists didn't like, where it was sort of like, they were really excited about doing all the science, and I was like, you have to turn it to outcomes. You have to turn it to doing something that we can educate people on and change on. So Tahoe, amazingly, has been at the front of that too. While I'm talking about climate, the governor has made that just a major focus of his governorship. And so we set goals in California, and we've been meeting them. So the AB 32 in 2006 said that by 2020, we were going to move to an emissions level that's equal to 1990. Well, we now, in 2018, have met the 2020 goal. And now we're accelerating the goal for what it'll be in 2030. We've had a goal of moving to 33% renewables in the electricity portfolio by 2020. We're going to meet that. So the next goal is 50% for whatever it is, 2030, 2040. We had, when Governor Brown was governor the first time, set goals for efficiency of buildings and energy standards. And while the rest of the nation has had their electrical use go up, in the same number of decades, California's has been rather level or just a small growth. because we have dealt with it with efficiency. But each of those, he has proposed increasing the goal, whether going to the next one on renewables, the next one on emissions overall, the next one on buildings. But then he added a new one that was sort of in my area. We never did goals related to natural lands and what might happen, whether forests or carbon sinks, whether protecting ag land from converting to urban uses, doing all that. What goals can you have and how can you limit emissions through that? So with cap and trade, we've reinstituted a program of ag land protection and are doing easements across the state and working on that. And we've done the first forest carbon plan of any of the 50 states to try to figure out how to deal with that and turn that into action. And it's really hard because all the others were goals that were established and they were just upping them. And with us, we're quantifying for the first time, trying to understand it. I dealt with one very recalcitrant state attorney that when we were talking about fire prevention and carbon sequestration, when we said that we would spend greenhouse gas money to keep fires from happening, I was asked in a meeting, well, what date would that fire have happened and how big would it have been? And I was sort of like, what planet do you live on? You know, we're preventing them, not predicting them. It's in the same way. And yet we have gone through the arduous process of quantifying that and trying to get to a place to do it. Until fire, the thing that I've spent most of my, plurality of my time on is water. And in California, we have a water system that was really designed for 20 or 25 million people. We're going to cross 40 before the end of the year in California. And a lot of it was designed 50 years ago. So what do we do? And the Secretary of Ag and the Secretary of EPA and myself 4 years ago issued a water action plan. It's available online. It's not like a typical government report. It's understandable. It's about 20 pages long. And we said, here are the things we have to do in California to get to a sustainable water supply. We have to make water conservation a way of life. We have to recycle much more than we are. We have to do more storage. We have to do more better management of our groundwater basins and use them for storage as well. We went through all these things, and then when we negotiated the 2014 water bond in California, we tied the water bond to those goals. And for the first time in one of these bonds, normally it's a string of earmarks, and this time we did regulations. You had to demonstrate how you're going to produce or save water with whatever grant you got. So that there were just defined outcomes based on merit rather than we want this river done, so here's this much for this river or whatever. So that we try to get the money out the door in a way that's meaningful. And it's hard, but it has been working. And the conservation that was done, and just to be anecdotal, well, actually, I know I'm being filmed, and so I run the danger of saying something that shows up somewhere. But one of the more interesting things about the drought was that the governor did his drought declaration and mandatory cuts, and it was just virtually the lead story of every national news that night. And so we're having this 3-hour meeting, I think the night before, 2 nights before, to go, and he wants to go over every paragraph in the declaration. And it takes us ages to get through it. And I sort of framed the meeting by saying, okay, you could probably get a little water around the margins out of what we're going to do, but the big thing is you have the bully pulpit, and we're not going to do this unless every individual Californian conserves. And so it's your call to action. And he argues with me all the way through the meeting. It's like, that's vague. Why would I do that? And I remember walking home that night thinking, I can't believe I lost that argument. I was just incredulous. And then I'm the one person standing next to him. I heard from anybody I knew on the East Coast and stuff because it was on the news. And he just walks out and says, We're the biggest water crisis of modern times. We're not going to do this unless everybody acts themselves. Everybody has to cut. It's everybody's action that's going to make this work, and I'm trying to look opaque because I can't believe he's doing this. And yet he is unique in a wonderful way. What he was doing in that meeting was getting to his own comfort level. You will notice he never talks from a written speech. He wants to have knowledge and comfort with what it is. That's what he was doing with me. He was not going to give me the satisfaction that I was winning the argument. And that, in a very for those of you that study political science, that was the other half. Because I posted, in the water bond, my undersecretary comes back to me one day and says, okay, I quit. And I said, well, what's that about? And she says, I went to focus groups and half the people in the focus group said they got their primary information from Facebook. I quit. And so I thought, oh, I should be posting more on Facebook. So I put a thing up when we were sitting around the table doing a statewide press call to explain the governor's proclamation, and there are maybe 30 responses, more than happens to anything, and it was all reasons why people couldn't cut, weren't persuaded, or why somebody else wasn't saving. I mean, a mayor of a town that I'm close to said, well, we're down to 106 gallons per person a day. How could we cut more? And I'm thinking, oh, well, in Santa Cruz, we're at 45. We can probably get down there. Somebody else said, it's Nestle. They're using all this water for bottled water. It's fracking. There were people in the South that said the people in the North don't have water meters. They can't conserve. People in the North said it's the people in the South that are having swimming pools. They're using water that comes from the North. And they just all did this, and I thought, oh man, we're going to have such trouble persuading them. And the water managers, with apologies to any that are in the room right now, they were really burrowed down on the difficulties that it meant for them. And what happened is about 4 weeks after that declaration, the people got it, and it sort of clicked over, and people started to conserve, people called for conservation, they realized it was them. It was sort of one of those times when using the pulpit really worked in moving the people, and yet it did change some of the water managers for a while. They were still stuck in some of their own stuff. And it's like, I remember speaking to a group about this size, and they were water managers, and somebody from the Sierra foothills stands up and says, this is a different climate in the foothills than it is on the coast, and yet we're under these same restrictions. And I sort of said, well, you know, the baseline for the city of Santa Cruz, or where they were before the drought, was 58 gallons a day, and you were 300 gallons a day. And that's the basis for your cut. Now, don't tell me that's not adjusted for climate. You know, the guy had walked into the wrong person to do that. And we still have that problem because in the defense of the water managers, they went and financed the whole water system based on what they thought the usage would be, and then it changes, and it throws off all their projections and what they were going to do. Well, I've talked a little longer than I thought, so let me do one more subject before I go to questions, and we can go anywhere you want for questions. And that's oceans and ocean policy. And, you know, in my career, you know, when I was mayor, we'd have to vote on fence permits. Welcome to the council, sir. You'll be doing those kinds of things. We'd vote on fence permits, and a whole neighborhood would show up, and they'd be split down the middle, and it would be so painful. And then I could work on ocean issues or something that would drive me. And so you sit through the fence permits to do the ocean issues, and I sit through all the oil regulation now to do ocean issues. And we just have one of the leading ocean programs in the world, and we have prioritized really 4 things: fisheries management, and we have the largest network of marine protected areas and state waters off of any of the 48 states, which is science-driven, adaptively managed to try to restore fish populations. And then we have different work that's done species by species to try to work on that. We're working on marine debris, which is a big issue. It's every land-based thing gets there. Julie Packard and I were two of the signers of the statewide ballot measure to protect the plastic bag ban, because that was a key to the marine debris policy, and so we're working on that. We have to work on adaptation because, and we have done the science, everybody in Sacramento is like, is anything only a 1 degree separation from Santa Cruz County? Convinced this is happening. So it's Gary Griggs that's chairing the science panel, that's doing the sea level rise science. And we did a complete bells and whistles study that was released in 2011. And it was one of those classic things where I never watch TV in the morning, and that was the morning I have to gather it together at 9 o'clock where we're going to do the sea level rise. The tsunami from Japan hits the California coast about an hour before the meeting. So I have the TV on, and they're broadcasting live from over the Santa Cruz Harbor in Sacramento, and they said the second wave should hit, and I'm like, well, they can't figure it out. It's hitting right now. You can see it going by. And that was before appreciable sea level rise at low tide. And so the real issue with sea level rise, my analogy is always, it's not like a bathtub just slowly filling up. It's the extreme event. It's the 2-year-old cannonballing into the bathtub. That is the thing that will make the difference, and that's what made it different. Santa Cruz and Crescent City were the two harbors hit the worst by the tsunami from Japan in 2011. And so we have, and in the last century, the sea level has risen 7 inches. The study in 2011 was much more understandable to explain to lay people, because it basically said, here are the medians of sea level rise for a given year. And I think the median for 2050 was a 14-inch rise over the time the study was done. And the reason it was at the median is if we're really, really good at our greenhouse gas programs, then maybe it'll be lower. If we're really bad, it will be higher. And the science tells you something that's strange that I didn't understand, is that just gravitational pull plays a role. And so the sea level rise is a little, coming off Antarctica, is a little lower with the gravitational pull. And where does it rise a little bit? But in the mid-northern hemisphere, right about where we are. Then the one that we did last year, where Gary was chair of the committee, if we'd have done a bells and whistles study, it would have been ready on January 1st coming up, and we're leaving office on January 5th. That was not acceptable. So we amalgamated existing science, did a little new, released it last year, and then released guidance to local governments and how they might be ready or try to look at what's going to happen. Because if you're a local elected official, I know we have the mayor here too, if you have a gravity flow water or sewer system that's attuned to the current level of the sea and it's going to rise, you're going to have to think about that infrastructure investment and what's going to happen over time. And so we released that. We adopted official guidance to try to help local governments understand what to do with it and how to help people plan for it. And so, and the last of the 4 things in oceans is ocean acidification. And when we arrived, there was not really much work being done on it. And so it's one of those times where you sort of take leadership, and we convened a science panel that didn't exist in California to examine ocean acidification. And then as we did this, and we're about to embark on a study, we were really approached by Washington and Oregon and the Puget Sound ground zero for some of the effects of ocean acidification. And we joined with Washington and Oregon and did a West Coast study. And once again, it was not a study of just what's the problem, although it really lined out the problem really clearly. It was also what are some early action steps you can take to deal with it. And there was even one that, once again, for a layperson, like there are certain ways you can do things with shellfish and strengthen their shells. You know, you can actually genetically deal with shellfish that might help them resist the increasingly acidifying ocean. But we're also doing the official documentation science on whether seagrass and seaweed and other things actually sequester carbon in a significant way and can help with the acidification. And I know Mark's here from the Elkhorn Slough Foundation, and I was even mentioning it beforehand that I visited one of the first years I was in the assembly and was shocked at the level of DDT that might still exist there. And yet DDT would come down in waterways, and the thing that would save us from it is the resiliency of other parts of the ocean. The fact that it was just coming in the mouths of waterways, and there are other places where it wasn't as much in evidence. That's the trouble with acidification, is it's just evenly distributed throughout the ocean. When we're trying to figure out how to be resilient or how to deal with it, it's a whole different thing. And so that is a challenge, and we have put in place the science. And then one last thing, I always try to resist talking about what's going on nationally. But we don't have much leadership on oceans at the national level in the current climate. So we decided to join with Washington and Oregon and establish an international alliance on ocean acidification. And it's patterned on the Paris Accords, where we get countries to come in, or in some cases subnationals, tribes or cities or other people, and to make their own plan and commitment for what they'll do on ocean acidification. And I went a year ago and spoke at the United Nations Oceans Conference in New York, and we have signed up France, Chile, Iceland, much to my amazement, the United Arab Emirates, the names of island republics in the Pacific that I never even heard of before, because they're the ones most at risk of all kinds of impacts to the sea. And we have this international alliance that's moving ahead. And hopefully, if we ever get to a point that we have leadership again at the federal level on these kinds of issues, we'll have a ready-made structure that they can take to the next level that is working from us. So we have been doing that sort of around the lack of leadership at the national level, and I'm really pleased with it. The governor is having next month, it is the bane of some of our existence right now. He's having an international climate conference in San Francisco. Now there's 5,000 people coming. There's 100 affiliated events. It's going to be a big deal, and it's all being planned out of all offices. And so it's finally coming together, but we're going to have an ocean acidification side event with everybody's coming to focus on what we're doing and what they can do. So I'm just going to stop, and there are certain things I didn't talk about, whether it's state parks or the Conservation Corps or some of the other things, but I'd be happy to take questions on anything that you might think is in my purview now. Yes?
Given, I think, the general agreement that reducing emissions is not adequate to stabilize the climate, let alone reverse climate change, and that sequestration is essential. Could you say a little more about California's strategy as far as forest or soil, terrestrial sequestration, what California's current strategy is to accomplish sequestration?
Well, let me go to your premise first, because it's exactly right. And the thing about it is that, you know, if we can't reverse the trend, or we reverse it after it warms another degree more, there's just going to be impacts that are close to irreversible or disastrous. And so, you know, the governor did an extreme events conference that was similar to the one he's doing next month at the end of his first year. And it was in San Francisco, and he was in an opening panel with some Nobel laureates and some stuff. And this reporter from a well-known national newspaper says, well, what are you going to do? Are you going to control emissions, or are you going to adapt to change? As if that's the choice. That is not the choice. We have to do both. And as I said earlier about the sea level rise study, yes, if we're overwhelmingly successful, which doesn't look imminent right now, then you don't have to do as much of the other. So we are the point people. on the adaptation side, the Natural Resources Agency. So we have issued different periodic reports and guidances. The latest one is called the Safeguarding, and it really talks about what you have to do for forests, what you have to do for the energy grid, what you have to do for building efficiency, all these things that are, or sea level rise is part of it. Heat islands in cities, a term I don't think I was familiar with until recent years. And so it gives some guidance and some science, and then we're doing these companion science studies. We have these different assessments. The one that will be released, we're releasing the latest one that's been in the making for 2 years, sometime in the next few weeks. It's called the fourth assessment, and it's an amalgamation of, I think, roughly 40 individual science studies on each of these topics, so you can have the science with regard to heat or different parts of it, or different parts of the forest issue. You can have the science out there for everybody to see and everybody to work with and everybody to draw conclusions from and try to move them along. And so the thing is I don't think we've been as strong as government could be, but that's because there's always a concern about doing extensive mandates on local governments or other people. And so we are naming the issues, illustrating the science, and pointing the way. And I think as it gets worse, that's when you probably move to more of the mandates on everything, providing it does in fact get worse. But and you can access the safeguarding, you'll access every one of those sciences by just going to our agency website, and we'll get you into all those places. What else? Yes.
I have two questions, and they're both about water. One is sort of statewide, and one is more local. Statewide, I see the state really supporting aggressively the use of treated sewage water to inject into the groundwater, going for indirect potable reuse, and hurdling right along for direct potable reuse. Why isn't the state also aggressively funding managed stormwater recharge projects and things like that that could be done much more cheaply and without the high energy requirement and the health risk? My second question is more local. When will the water rights amendment for the San Lorenzo River be amended so that place of use can be changed and water can be shipped to SoCal Creek Water District?
Let me take the second one first.
Okay.
I'm not sure. It's in the water board, which is the one thing that is not under me. It's in the EPA. But I know that it's been filed, or they're working on it. They're trying to move it. The trouble is, I have to be honest, the trouble is that I was working on this one issue where Clint Eastwood wanted to donate 55 acres at the mouth of the Carmel River to the state, but he wanted to have this one water rights thing clarified before he'd do it. And even though I was not supposed to influence the water rights thing, I kept having my attorney say, when is this going to be done? And it went in 2 parts, and it took 4 years. And they said, you don't understand. Compared to our other ones, this is really quick. And I'm like, oh God, what's slow? And so that's why I can't predict how long that will take. But it's got to happen, because the real thing, it's hard to believe, but Jerry sort of hinted at years. In November, it'll be 37 years since I was elected to the Santa Cruz City Council. And at the time, water districts were all suing each other. They were fighting. And we started the first regional study where we all looked together at what the water demand would be from the build out of every general plan, and then what resources existed locally, and trying to match them. And as I was mentioning earlier at a previous conversation, John Ricker said to me after a speech I gave to the Connecting the Drops event, he says, that was the first time everybody worked together, but nothing came out of that. And I said, in our defense, the earthquake happened. But nevertheless, that is one of the keys to success, is if You know, Soquel Creek is 100% groundwater. Santa Cruz City, which serves twice as large an area as the city, is 95% surface water. So one is going to be up when the other is down. And so if you can figure out a way that you can work conjunctively, it is just much more efficient over time. And you move that way, and it doesn't, the water rights, the laws, a lot of the past contracts, they're not guided to you're having to do a reorientation of how everybody works and how everybody was set up and how everybody thinks. So that's just one of the steps. On the first question you asked, there is money for stormwater recapture that was in the Prop 1. There's equal scientific problems in that when you have runoff from the urban areas and you're recapturing it, you have oil, you have other stuff, you're still having to treat, you're still having to deal with water quality impacts from that. And I think the real issue is what works, and can you prove, even with some demonstration projects, what works. And desal is not popular in certain places around here. They've done one that's one of the bigger industrial ones in the world in San Diego. And you see that works if you have this large water district that has many sources, because that's the most expensive because of the energy intensity. And the rate shock from desal can be buried if you have 900,000 customers and lots of other sources. And so the real question is what works, how much do things cost, how much can you prove that they work? And after a while, there's some places where there's just limited options, and where either recycling or stormwater capture or desal might be the only things that are between them and not having enough water. And so it's just trying, and I think what we were trying to do with the water bond too is make sure it invested in all these different things, and then you could get some sense of what was working and what wasn't, and maybe create a market for cities deciding, okay, stormwater recapture is it, and then in the next water bond you up that because you're finding out that it works and you've developed the technology to clean and deal with it. So it's not totally simple. Yes, and then I see one here. So.
In that same vein, wouldn't they issue a temporary permit to allow transfer of water until they could get the water rights worked out?
It depends, because sometimes the only ability to do that is if it's an emergency. So
Well, we're in an emergency.
I know. If you can declare the right emergency, you can get there.
Okay. Well, if we put a group together where we're in Sacramento now and then pushing it, would it help? I mean,
It wouldn't hurt. And if you're doing that, get in touch and I'll make sure you get in to see somebody in the water board.
right, okay.
Yes.
I think, as you know, we have a new Monterey Bay Community Power, which I'm very happy about, but just when they were starting to announce it and when they all switch over to it, there was some hoopla in the newspaper about someone was trying to make that illegal. Do you remember that? Is there
Yes.
anything standing in the way of this being a permanent?
What it is there's a bill that's being considered again at the end of this session that was being considered at the end of last session to deal with these global power issues, including whether or not there's an option for a regional grid in western states and some of the other power issues.
Oh, these are federal.
No, this is
okay,
state.
okay.
Because it's getting western states to decide if they want to be in one grid together, because the wind might be blowing in Wyoming when it's not here, or whatever it is, that is that combination. And in the context of that bill, there was a proposal that anybody that hadn't launched on community power stop. And at the time, that was at the end of last year's session, there's still a few months from the community power in the Monterey Bay launching and a few others. Well, that bill crashed and burned and didn't move. They launched. And it doesn't appear, I asked this, it doesn't go, it's not directly our issue yet, but I asked if that similar provision was in this bill at the end of session, and I was told, no, not now.
Right.
So, but the one here has launched.
Yes.
Yes.
I'm curious, when you bring up San Diego County with 900,000 water users, have you or anyone done in the state a comparison of county size for what kinds of projects are appropriate and working really well versus when a county is too small for something to work, such as the wastewater treatment, etc.?
There's not really been a study because a lot of that is, I don't know how to say, self-validating. Because if a county's out there with a certain number of people and they can't afford certain things, then that's evidence. And if they can, that's evident. That's sort of the way it's worked in a more free market way, rather than, because the studies are done by individual county to decide if you can bear the cost spread across your rate base of any individual project.
I asked because the group that came to talk to Santa Cruz County about that wastewater treatment system said they were very concerned for us that we were too small a county at 300,000 for the wastewater reinjection and treatment system to be affordable.
There's a bunch of different ones. So the Orange County is where they've done significant injection of treated wastewater. San Diego, they're just starting. They crashed and burned on their water recycling about 10 or 15 years ago. They're just starting again. It's called Pure San Diego. And then San Diego Regional District did the desal plant. And then Orange County is proposing, there's a similar private proposed large desal plant that the Coastal Commission has had some issues with that hasn't been permitted yet. So there's all those different things that fit in the base rate. And the real thing is this is where it is the vigilance of the citizens. So in Santa Cruz County, you just have to ask, okay, what's the cost? What's the cost against the rate? And some of those things do work. They do work if you size them right. That's the issue is what the sizing is. And one of the reasons that I was not a fan of the Zanny Dam when I was elected to the city council 37 years ago, having a second dam in Santa Cruz, is the base of ratepayers wasn't enough to sort of support those two dams, and it sort of provided a real incentive to grow, because unless you grew dramatically, you wouldn't have the rate base to pay for the second dam. You just have to ask those questions, and to be honest, some of them do pencil out. They do pencil out at certain sizes, but you have to ask those questions in the planning process to see how it works or doesn't work. There were other hands, yes.
How's the health of San Francisco Bay?
Better. And I think there's so many different issues with San Francisco Bay. I mean, it's so much better than it was when Save the Day was started and the infilling was happening in the 60s, and where the Bay Conservation and Development Commission came from that movement. There's all these issues. They're having problems in some places in the Bay with invasives. It is the estuary, so you have to have enough water flowing in it to have the right mix with salt as it flows in. You have to make sure that you're dealing with what the level of sewer treatment is going in. And you know, the reason AMBAG was formed here is there were something like 15 individual, I'm not having the number right, sewer treatment plants into the Monterey Bay, and a lot of them were advanced primary. And so it was really getting to a point that you had more uniform sewage treatment plants and try to get them to a higher level. I was surprised when I took this job to find out that San Diego was still had a waiver at this late date for advanced primary treatment, which means, you know, there's secondary where you remove a certain amount of solids, tertiary you remove a greater amount of solids. Advanced primary is basically just letting the sewage go with chemicals in it, you know, not treatment. And that was phased out almost everywhere in California around the Bay a few decades ago. So, but the issue over time too, sea level rise, if you see the maps in the interior of the San Francisco Bay, that's going to be the pressing issue. And one of the resiliency measures people are talking about is berms and planting out from sort of the bay shore in certain places. And if the projections in 30 years were met, the Oakland Airport and the San Francisco Airport would be challenged to be underwater, and San Jose is not far away. And so those are, the health of the bay is always an issue, but the rising sea level is going to be a challenge, and with neighborhoods that are nearby too. So that's going to be as much a challenge as anything else.
Speaking of
I didn't see you here.
Speaking
Good
of
to
the
see
Bay, San Francisco Bay, the big discussion right now has to do with the Twin Tunnel and the governor's plan, which you have defended, if I'm not mistaken.
you. You're not mistaken.
Pardon?
You're not mistaken.
I'm not mistaken.
Not the first time I've said that.
But you brought up against the editorial department of the San Jose Mercury, which feels very, very strongly that the Twin Tunnels project is a mistake and it will harm San Francisco Bay. Can you defend that plan? Is it going from twin to a single tunnel? And how are you going to,
It would take
how will having the tunnels or the tunnel
It would take about an
guarantee the
hour
health of the bay?
to answer every question you just asked to satisfaction. But let me try to do it succinctly. Basically, when the water project was built in the early and mid-60s, it was built before any environmental law that we appreciate now is in place. So for 40 or 50 years, that project has been retroactively mitigated. And, you know, the Skelton of the LA Times wrote once that the Delta was the most pristine area in the state. And I said, look up the definition of pristine. It is really in its natural state unaffected. That's the most engineered place in the universe. And it's engineered because when Europeans arrived in California, there were 500,000 acres of wetlands in the Delta. When we took office, there were 31,000 acres of wetlands. The things that have become these Delta islands is the one place that was sort of above all the sloughs and the places the river met. Over the course of 150 years, had levees around them. The nature of the soil was stuff that the farming lowered the sea level. So now these so-called Delta islands, many of them are 15 or 20 feet below sea level. And the levees were built, well, people claim that they're strong, they were built for agriculture and not for residential strength. When the water project was built, it was never entirely completed because the intake to the aqueducts and canals at the base, it's called the Tracy pumps, but somebody argued with me in a town hall meeting in Dublin that it's not really Tracy. And I said, okay, it has the name, just let's go with that as the description. The Tracy pumps, it was designed to take this massive amount of water, and it's never operated at that massive amount because for two reasons. It reverses, as it is, it reverses flows and streams in the southern delta. It sucks fish into places that they are not naturally. As a matter of fact, the Department of Water Resources has trucks that capture fish and truck them back to other parts of the delta. It's really ridiculous. And the delta into the San Francisco Bay, apropos of a previous question, is an estuary, and you have to have a certain amount of flows to keep the salt at a certain gradient and certain levels out into the bay and in. There was one time in the worst part of the drought when the flows were so low that we thought we might lose control of salinity in the delta. And before the Central Valley project was built, in the early 30s, there was a drought that was so bad that salt came in all the way to Clarksburg, which is about 10 miles south of Sacramento. In the engineered world of the delta now, there are releases that keep the salt at bay. Shasta is a cold water pool. It releases cold water at certain times for the right cycle of salmon and other salmonoids so that they can reproduce, but the wetlands that existed for salmon reproduction don't exist. So the governor is doing two things. One is we are trying to, before we leave, have started or restored 12,000 acres of wetlands in the Delta, that regardless of if this project goes ahead or not, you need more wetlands for fish. We just did a revolutionary project because when the Sacramento River hits a certain flood level, it flows around in the channel between Davis and Sacramento, the bypass, the yellow bypass. And that was traditionally at a certain level, and all these fish would swim all the way up the bypass and then die just short of the entryway because they had no way through. We have just cut a major notch in the top of the weir and in the river intake so that for the first time fish can swim all the way back. They won't be trapped and lost. And so in that context is the governor's water project. And it would have modern screens and things that the fish would finally be in the right place in the Delta. No more water would be taken than is taken now, which is what the San Jose Mercury does not believe. They just don't believe it. And I've had these editorial board meetings with them where they just keep talking about Hollywood lawns. And I said, I'm sorry. From the Delta, it waters lawns in Cupertino, Saratoga, San Jose, Gilroy, hardly Hollywood. Santa Clara Valley imports 60% of its water, and it's almost all from the Delta or a little bit from Hetch Hetchy, which is a Delta source. And if they don't have it, they go dry in Santa Clara County, which the Mercury doesn't seem to understand. The one difference, it would have the fish in the right place, it would take the same amount of water, you would still have the water for flows, we would try to restore wetlands. The one difference is right now, in that configuration of the Delta, when you have heavy flows after storms or in high rain years, you have no way to take it and store it for dry years. That is the one thing that would be different with the governor's project, is you could take extra water after you've taken what you need for the environment, after what you've taken for water supply, and store it for years. Because right now, with the pumps as the only entryway at the south of the Delta, you can't do that. This issue, to me, is a little like the Middle East. Everybody decided their view and what altar they worshiped at a long time ago, and nothing new seems to impact it. And yet, it's received most of the permits. It has majority support of people in California, and it has a shot of going ahead, and this is in a significantly scaled back thing. The peripheral canal would have been 23,000 or 30,000 cubic feet per second capacity around the Delta. This maxes out at 9, and you wouldn't take it in a time of low flows. You would have the same restrictions that you have now. But I'll be really happy to leave that to whoever the next secretary is when they get here. That's the briefest I can make it. Yes?
Along the same line, my experience over many years of watching all these kinds of things happen is that at the time the intentions are good and the restrictions are good, but the political, what's the word I want, imperative that comes later causes bad decisions to be made and changes to the original concept. What insurance can you have when you build a certain capacity that it will be honored?
Well, now we have laws that were in effect. We have court decisions that enforce the salinity and certain other things, and we would have permit conditions that would place those limits and really could be changed in a significant way. But you're exactly right, and I think that's the fear. The irony is that since the water project was built in the 1960s, it has pulled back and contracted from what all the original permit laws and things were because of later laws and court decisions and other things. And you'll know who I'm talking about, but I was having a conversation in Washington, D.C. with one of California's senators, and I could say she, and that covers them all. But she said something to me like, we need to do this, this, and this. And I said, the biggest argument against what the governor wants to do and other people is they say there'll be a political deal that will undo something later, and you are speaking to exactly that right now with what you're proposing. And it's like, if anybody's going to have any faith, you have to make deals and stick to them, and stick to them in the law. And that's what's being proposed here. But it's, I think in the history of California, there's always reason to be afraid, but more in a more rational place at this point. And when the, one thing I didn't answer that you asked about, it just occurs to me, because you said one tunnel or two. And the two tunnels are being proposed not for capacity, but for redundancy, that if one goes out, you have another one there. You could theoretically, if one never goes out, live with one in it, and there's the redundancy. And this speaks to the complexity of the issue, is you have the federal Central Valley project and you have the state water project. The state water project delivers 55% of the water from the Delta. The federal project delivers 45%. And the federal water contractors, because of the confusion of the federal agencies, has not come in the project. So there's an agreement to go ahead with one tunnel, and that's what the state contractors could fund. This is all privately funded. It's no taxpayer California dollar. And then the Metropolitan Water District of California has agreed to fund the whole thing and then allow the federal contractors to buy in, and it gets around the federal confusion. So, but it confused the public completely. They couldn't get to one tunnel versus two and what it meant. What else?
In the matter of acidification of the Pacific Ocean and stuff, you said that Oregon, Washington, and California have started this thing, and other Pacific Islanders and France or Arabia, we're getting involved. Is anyone else on the Pacific coast involved besides just our three states? You know, like Alaska and Canada?
Well, Alaska is... I look for the euphemism, a little more libertarian than the rest of the states. And at the time we started, Canada had a different government, and they're looking more favorably now.
Okay. What about south of our border? Does that mean that?
Well, we have Chile, which has the largest coastline of South America, and we're looking at others. There are others that are exploring whether it's...
But they've shown interest?
Yes.
Oh, good. Okay.
We're working with a lot of them. I think I'm going to get a water question.
Yeah, I'll ask a water question, but about the oceans. You talked about the oceans earlier, and I thank you for coming here today. It's really interesting. We have these wonderful protected marine sanctuaries up and down our state and along the United States. And every now and then you read something in the paper that they might be threatened by the federal government, kind of wanting to change the boundaries to maybe do oil production and things like that. So my question is, to what extent do you think they are at risk, or conversely?
Well, the state ones are in state waters. We have jurisdiction. They're sticking out. The federal marine sanctuaries are the ones that are a little at risk. And there's a legal question that hasn't been tested yet about whether administratively you can arbitrarily contract one that was done either legislatively or with the previous executive order or whatever. And the Monterey Marine Sanctuary, because I was a real activist at the time it was designated, part of that was oil and gas. And the real question is whether or not they would open that or the Farallones to the north for oil and gas within a sanctuary. And I think it hasn't been legally tested. We have opposed it publicly. The Attorney General has all but said we will sue. We will fight that. And a lot of times, I actually met with Secretary Zinke. I think I've met with him 3 times, twice with the governor, once alone in his office in D.C. And I have been the point person opposing offshore oil drilling off the California coast with regard to the feds. And I think it will take them so long that the current president will have to win a second term and be completely successful in everything he does to allow the leases to go forward. So I think there's enough room for activism, opposition, lawsuits to try to deal with that in the right way.
Don't make us be complacent. Don't make us be complacent.
Believe me, complacency is not our problem right now. Other questions? Yes, Nancy.
You know, first of all, John, we're so happy to have you here. Right here in our backyard, you're a wealth of knowledge and resources and everything. And can't say enough about what you've done and your commitment to the public and public service. So appreciate that very much. We have a concern here in Harbor Valley with the levee. And we've had the levee almost be, filled up and almost flood, and you've got senior citizens out there that are, every time it rains, they're just very, very distraught.
And they're mostly in your district.
Yes, they are. and we have, Congressman Panetta has helped, and he's given us, there are 17 cracks on the South Sequoias Creek, and they're fixing them right now. But the concern is with fish and game. Is there any kind of, I don't know if we're going to need assistance along the lines down here, but we've got to have this so people feel secure, and people are very much into saving the fish, the wildlife, everything, but is there some type of compromise eventually?
Yes, but the issue is larger. And the issue is there's going to be a permanent long-term project on the Pop Road levee.
I think there is.
Well, yeah, but if we can get to that, all the things that you asked about hopefully won't have the same import or be moved if you can get to that. And when I was in the legislature, due to the vagaries of redistricting, I represented Big Sur in the Monterey Peninsula and Santa Cruz in southern Santa Clara County that was connected by about 1.5 miles of the Pop Road right here. It was like barbells. And at the time, there wasn't the interest in the other assembly member in dealing with the river issue. And so I did a bill that authorized a state share to the Popero levee project. And I happened to be budget chair at the time, and I happened to be negotiating with the Senate and Governor Schwarzenegger, and I made sure there was enough money in the flood bond in 2006 to fund that authorization for the state share of the Popero project. And it's been stuck. There's some people that were on a Sierra Club committee with me at some point about 20 years ago when we were trying to figure out how to break through for the right project, because that's when they wanted, and apparently they might want to do it again, build the walls in Watsonville because it's so constrictive and development has happened on both sides of the levee that you don't have much place to broaden it, and so you have to go up if you're really going to do it. And I had this thing that now is funny, but I had unincorporated Gilroy, San Martin, Morgan Hill, and the Coyote Valley in my assembly district, and I'd get these letters from the editor of the Gilroy newspaper who would have his editorial about the Popero River with a note that says, you have more constituents in the upper watershed of the river than you have in the lower watershed. He would mail it to me. And so the real question is whether we can get to a project that's a long-term solution. And even though it's not directly, Fish and Wildlife it is, some of the flood stuff it is in DWR, Department of Water Resources. So I met with Zach Friend and the Santa Cruz staffers a few months ago to see how I could help in whatever way. But it's going to be getting to some agreement that gets that long-term project. And the thing that scares me is it's a 10-year flood protection now. That's nothing.
We know that.
Well, no, and I was a county manager in the personnel department, which I thought was away from water, in 1997, and they were volunteering, all of us. So I spent 2 nights with all the displaced people at the fairgrounds as a docent or whatever it's called, because we were doing that. So I saw exactly what the impacts were when that happened. And so, but the thing is I think the effort needs to be on whatever compromise it takes to get the basic flood upgrade project through. And that's been hanging there for 20 years now. And
Well, Jimmy Panetta seems to be wanting to help us
I
out,
talked
and
to
it's
him
good to
about
know
it.
that you're right here with us.
I would help
Thank
you
you.
however you need. Yes.
I was wondering how the sustainable groundwater plan is going, and the fact that we have all these levees and dikes and whatnot, but they cut the rivers and the streams from the floodplains and stops percolation. So I want to know how this idea is going to integrate into these groundwater plans, and how's it going in general?
Well, you know a lot. Maybe not everybody knows a lot. So in 2014, the state adopted the Groundwater Management Act, SGMA, and it really says by 2040, all the stressed water basins in California have to be brought into balance, meaning they have to have what goes in equal to what comes out every year. And the Pajaro Valley was about 20 or 25 years ahead of that act. And as an aside, when we were arguing for that being enacted, I always said, whenever Texas is ahead of you on an environmental issue, you should scratch your head. Because we were the only state in the West to be unregulated. We were the Wild West when it came to groundwater. And that act was the result of a lot of compromises. I would have liked some of the final deadline to be sooner. But that's how you got the votes, was to do that. And in some of the places, it's very different what the impacts are in different parts of the state. And we have this one place in the San Joaquin Valley where the subsidence is so dramatic from the overdrafting of the groundwater that some of the canals have sunk and bridges on sides have sunk. And they're actually having trouble, I think, if I remember it right, it's in the Federal Friant Canal. They're actually having trouble delivering even half of the amount of water in the capacity because of the subsidence that's happening around it. And when the subsidence happens, it's not like a balloon that deflates and you inflate it again. With all those soils and the things, when it compacts, you just can't get it back in any appreciable way. So the Groundwater Act set certain deadlines for, because the current existing bodies don't cover the basin. You might have 5 cities, 2 water districts, not one district that covers a discrete basin. So there had to be joint powers agreements, there have to be plans, and then they have to march down the path to making sure they're sustainable. Thus far, things are on track. I was expecting that there would be some real resistance in some or some holdouts. That hasn't happened. And then some of the issues you named are then getting dealt with individually in each individual one about how to do that. Because, and the Andy Fisher pilot project here, which is if you have farmers that might be willing to use part of their land to percolate and get some kind of remuneration for giving up the portion of that land that might have otherwise been money producing or crop producing. They're trying that as a pilot here. I think that would be great. If that works, it would be nice to expand to other places, because I think one of the troubles is you just have these industrial projects where you rely on one source, you rely on something big, and if you can spread some of what you have to do among different landowners or throughout a district, it might be easier. But those are things that people are trying to figure out, when just 4 short years ago, they didn't have to do this or even think about it. They're all trying to get used to what the culture is, what the issues are, how they're going to meet the deadlines. And we actually, it's all running together. It might be last year's budget or the budget before. We actually got an appropriation to have technical assistance, so that there would be technical assistance for the individual JPAs or districts that are trying to figure some of these things out, so they're not just out there on their own struggling. That's a brief answer to what might be
The San Benito Agricultural Land Trust is really expanding right now to meet the conservation needs for San Benito County as Santa Clara County expands into that area, farmland and all the ag land down Highway 25. And I've worked with land trusts a lot, and I know how critical that connection with your office is. So as you pass out of this service and we get a new person, do you have advice to us on how we stay connected with the office and help make sure that we get, take advantage of the SALT program?
You know, I think that I was either 5 months in or 6 months in, and at the beginning, and my assistant says, you understand that you've had 550 meetings or appointments since you started in January. And I was like, you're kidding. And she had been in prior administrations. I said, how long does this go? She goes, oh, for about a year. And I was like, you're kidding. And it's because everybody was trying to make sure I understood about their issue in some part of the state. And that's what you have to do. You have to try to get your hooks in to the next secretary and just make sure that they understand exactly what the issues are, what your track record is, what you need. Because now, that's why I don't really want to go away I mean, I'm fine with going away from this job, but I don't want to go away from the public realm, because now I understand the watershed issues on the east side of the Sierra and all these things that happen from all that. And sometimes your legislators can really help, because I was at the doorstep of my predecessor when I was in the legislature all the time. And it led to certain things coming that might not have come otherwise. And so I'm sure that Mark Stone, Bill Monning, or who succeeds him, Ronna Caballero, or who succeeds her, would help you do that as well, because it needs to be done. And they need to think that there's almost no other place but the Central Coast. I think we're past where we're supposed to be. Is there one last question? What now?
Well, since you brought up Senator Monning, he has twice introduced SB 623 that would tax everybody for water. And what do you think of that? It's been shot down, but what's your sense of that?
The broader proposal is that they're disadvantaged water districts that just don't have a tax base or base to fix some of their things. And when I was in the legislature, I'm not going to get it right, I want to say San Geronimo. It's a place outside Salinas. It was sort of a farm worker-based neighborhood, and it had just completely degraded water and no basis to fix it. And I worked with them to get a grant out of Prop 50 to try to figure out how to do that. And what his bill is to try to affect that at a statewide level. There's something like 1 million Californians that have water that's just, the quality is challenged. They don't, and he's looking to put a fee on every single water district in the state to try to make sure the disadvantaged districts are fixed. The reason he hasn't succeeded is that there's all these water districts that think I'm being filmed. And sort of feel like it's not their problem. And so they have really risen up for the opposition. And the question, it needs to be done. The question is, what is the mechanism? How do you do it? Because you just can't have people that don't have water security. You have to figure out a way that everybody has a right to clean drinking water in California. And there's even a bill to that effect now. He's just trying to fund it. And so, to me, it's just strategy. It's a question of what different way would work to make that happen. And he's been valiant in trying this twice, and he came close. But it's also a 2/3. And now that gas tax is being referended to the ballot, and a senator was recalled over his vote for the gas tax, some legislators from marginal districts are very skittish about doing that. And by the way, even though I probably can't take a position on the gas tax, $80 million from the gas tax comes to the state park system. And for the first time in years, the state park system has been uprighted financially by the fact that that's there. And my panic is that if that goes away, where are you going to find a way to fix what? And we live in a place that has a disproportionate amount of state parks, where it's a disproportionate amount of the economy and the things that are done here. So it's great. I've apparently run about 20 minutes over, so thank you for
Hi, I'm Jonathan Pilch. I'm the Executive Director of Watsonville Wetlands Watch, and just want to say thank you so much to John, and thank you all for being here. We truly appreciate all of your interest in all of these important issues. So thanks for coming, and we hope to see you soon. There's snacks in the back, and if you haven't signed in and you want to keep in touch with all of the great activities of Watsonville Wetlands Watch, please take a moment to write your name down and keep in touch with us. So, thanks.
Thank you.